Hi, today I'm going to teach you guys how to start your modeling journeys by learning how to light and add atmosphere to a scene to make it look cinematic. For a practical use, I'm going to show you guys the scene that I used in the thumbnail. This is like what it looks like without textures, obviously. But this scene looks like this, and then once we add the dust, boom. So immediate effect. It gives it a lot of depth, as you can also see just toggling this on and off. It gives the scene more interest. I think it adds a lot there. And then here's just a general fog. So this would be one even fog throughout the whole scene. And then this is the dust cloud fog later. So even without any texturing, any extra models or anything like that, just that dust fog creates a huge difference. Okay, so the first thing you guys are going to need is two plugins. One comes with Blender and one we're going to download. The first one that comes with Blender, if you go to your preferences, you scroll over to add-ons. I have enabled on, but we're going to go to edit first and then go to preferences. Go to add-ons and you're going to type in node. And this node wrangler, you're going to make sure that that's turned on. It comes with Blender, so you don't have to do anything too crazy to turn it on. Just check it on here. And then for the second add-on, I'm going to have you guys go over to Blender Kit. This is a free add-on. I plug it all the time. We're not sponsored, but I guess it'd be cool for a sponsorship. But basically what this does, it allows you to drag in models, textures, HDRIs, which we're going to be using later. So for this, all you have to do is download Blender Kit. It will download a free thing. Then you come into Blender. We're going to go the same way we did last time. So edit, preferences, and this time you're just going to type in Blender. And then I have it already installed, so mine can be ticked on or off by using this checkbox. If you're installing it for the first time, you're going to go down to install, find the install location, select on the zip file, and then it will automatically install it. And then you'll see it here, and then you can click it on to install it. Once those two things are started, we're basically ready to get going. So the first thing you're going to want to do to make cinematic scenes is, of course, deleting the default cube. Next, we are simply going to add a plane, push S to scale, and then we're going to make it 10. So scale 10, and that will scale up that plane for us. This is going to be our ground layer for now. This will just kind of like give you an image of kind of what we're making on. The next thing I want you guys to do is go to Cycles Render Engine, and if you have an NVIDIA GPU or if you have an AMD GPU, go to GPU Compute, and then you're going to want to go to Preferences one more time. Go to your system, and if you have an NVIDIA card, go to Optics and choose your card. CUDA is also better than just leaving it to none, but I would choose Optics. It's the fastest for me. Once we have this plane, we're going to use this as our ground layer once again. We're just going to need a model to use. So as always, let's grab Suzanne and simply drag her on up. That's fine. We're not doing anything too crazy with the modeling. That will be another episode. We're next going to grab some textures. Now these textures can, with the add-on enabled, you should see it in the top. If you don't, you may have to just enable tool settings and it will pop down like that. There's 5 tabs here. They can all be used to find different pre-made things that you can then use for your project. The first thing we're going to do, however, is get an HDRI. These are things that basically take a 360 image of a world, and then that picture texture is what will help light our scene. And I'll show you why that's useful to use an HDRI for the beginning stages, and then we'll go into more advanced tutorials later. So just to give you guys an example of kind of what the advantages of an HDRI are, let's first just grab a sun. Next, we're going to go into our world settings, and you're going to turn the strength down to 0. And what that does, if we turn our sun off, if you have the strength at 1 and we go into our rendered view, as you can see, we're kind of getting this like gray color, or whatever color the world color is, constantly being emitted. And this is not necessarily super useful, as it's just really unrealistic to have everything around a model be completely light. So we're going to turn that down to 0, which gives us complete darkness. Turning on the sun, this would be like the sun at, I guess, like noon on this summer solstice where it's like straight down. So if we just give it something like, let's give it like a nice light like that. As you guys can see, this isn't the most realistic lighting. Once again, the same problem we had with the world color. This isn't something that you would see in nature a lot, where there's only one light source and everything else is completely pitch dark. And what that does is it creates very strange shadow regions where there's no light bleed or nothing's bouncing off of it. And again, on your fill and key side, you're going to have a lot of light, but on the backlight area, it's going to be pretty dark. So I wouldn't suggest using just one light source. And if you do, you definitely have to add atmosphere and other things in order to fill in the gaps. So let's delete that sun, and let's go to the HDRI, and let's type in forest. Let's see what options this gives us. So if we go through these, we get a couple forest shots. Let's select one we like. I like this one, as you can see the name, and we're just going to drag that into our scene. You can select any of these. Basically, the higher the resolution, the more detail will be in the backgrounds. For me, I'm just going to do something like the 4K texture. You'll see it downloading here. And now already major improvement. If you can see right here, whereas last time we had a super hard shadow, this time we're already getting a nice realistic shadow. Because once again, the sky on an overcast day is going to cast shadows from multiple directions. So rather than getting like a hard outline of your character, you're going to get something softer, more like this. So I'm really liking the way this is turning out. Already huge improvement. So let's go and add some textures. We can just use this stone procedural texture. We'll put that for the ground. And as you can see, we don't really have to do too much to this texture. It's not looking super realistic, but it's going to be good enough for what we're going to use it for right now. And then for the next thing, let's pick something for Suzanne. Let's do a rusty one. I like that. Okay, perfect. So rusty procedural texture. As you can see, again, we're looking a lot more realistic. If we shade smooth on Suzanne, this is probably going to be even better. We're just going to add a simple modifier here. So go to your modifiers, add a subdivision surface modifier. Right now we're viewport of 1. If we bump this up to 2, it's going to be a little bit more realistic. So we'll leave it at 2 for the render, but only 1 for the viewport. That's going to be more than fine for now. So if I was to add a camera to this scene by going Shift A and then add a camera, if I go into this camera view, I'm just going to move it back. You can do this by moving it, or you can click walk fly in order to move your camera around kind of like this, like a video game. We're just going to select a shot like, let's say we like this big rock wall, so we're going to do something like maybe Suzanne's towering over us like that. We'll do center frame. We'll go a little bit off center. Okay, boom. So right now, again, we're getting somewhat of a realistic look. Cycles is doing a great job. The big problem right now is while we have a basic cinematic lighting setup, we don't really have anything for the light to be bouncing off of other than the basic model of the floor and Suzanne. Light isn't naturally going to move off of the background because it's a stationary picture. So we're going to need something to kind of interact with that light in order to make it seem like the scene is alive and breathing. And what you can use for that is volumetrics. So on a normal model, if we just click on to, let's say, our Suzanne, if we were to go into our shader editor, as you can see, the shader is running off of the surface. There are 3 nodes, or 3 anchors that the node has: surface, volume, and displacement. The displacement is what adds positional elements to a mesh. The surface is obviously the surface, what it looks like, the color, and the volume is what is inside of it. So outside, inside, and displacing the thing. If we go back to our 3D viewport, again, we're still in rendered view. If I was to add a mesh, and let's say we do a cube, if I make it really big, right now there is nothing happening inside, it's just completely black, and on the outside it's white. That's not what we want when we add atmosphere. So what we're first going to do is just scale up our cube, and roughly, it's not too terribly important, but we'll just roughly put it kind of where we want the fog to be. Next, the magic is going to happen back in the shader tab, so I want you guys to head over to there. And we're going to, with our cube selected in the top right, we're going to add a new shader. And as you can see, this shader that is added is automatically a principal BSDF, which is for the surface. So instead, we're going to just delete that, and we have our material output node. We are going to now add a principal, but instead of a BSDF, we're going to add a principal volume. This principal volume is used in a lot of ways for like fog and stuff like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this volume anchor and put it right into the volume of the material. So now when we go back, as you can see, we have fog. The problem is the fog is so thick it's almost behaving like a solid, unless you look like very carefully at just the edges. And as you can see, that's kind of giving you like a nice fog there, but it's far too thick for what we need it for. So what we're going to do is go back to the shader tab, and we're just going to take that density down to something like 0.01. So then we come back to the 3D viewport. Now you can see it's very thin, and if you align it onto something on the background, you can kind of see the difference we're getting right here, where the area behind looks like the light is going through some sun, as the sun comes, it's going through some of this atmosphere, and on the left, it's perfectly clear. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our camera view. As you can see, again, we're getting this nice atmospheric fog there. And instead of going to a new tab, I'll just open this so that you guys can see what I'm doing down here. So the first thing that you're going to want to do when you're adding volumetrics is first kind of just dial in the basic level of fog you want. I think 0.01 looks pretty good right now, but let's see how far we want to push it. If we go with something with 0.04, I really like kind of the effect that's giving us. That looks like a pretty decent amount of fog. Right now the fog is also just like mist almost. It's like a pretty clear white. So if we want to say, let's say we take the color of the background, we're going to go with something a little bit more beige. Coming this direction right about there. And as you can see, there's your color that it's emitting. So that's looking really good. I think that's like tying the scene together pretty nicely. For a lot of scenes, this could be potentially where you stop. You have your cinematic light, you just can add models, create scenes, that kind of stuff. But I'm going to show you guys how to take it a step further and add something that really feels like it's giving the scene a lot of movement. So what I want you guys to do is come back out, and we are going to add a noise texture. What this noise texture is going to do is it's going to allow us to break up the evenness of this fog and create something that is more akin to smoke or dust that is flying through the scene. So if we take this noise texture and we run the factor from our noise texture into, let's say we run it straight into the density, it's kind of hard to see what exactly is happening. So what you're going to want to do is do Shift and Control if you're on a PC, and that will run the node that you're clicking into the surface. So as you can see, there's black areas, white areas. One will be the thickness, so where it's white, it'll be thicker, and where it's black, it'll be kind of a void. So in order to control this, we're going to want to run this through a color ramp. So I want you to take a color ramp, and you're going to put that color ramp between the two. So now we're able to, with the black and white handles, we're essentially able to control how much of the noise texture is coming through. So if I push this all the way down, as you can see, we're starting to kind of get the effect we're looking for, where we're getting pockets of smoke. So it's not fully smoked, there's pockets of smoke. And again, the easiest way to do this is to click Control Shift and then hit this. And now, as you can see, like I said before, the white areas are where the fog is going to be its densest, and the black areas are going to be where it's a little bit thinner. So almost, if we push it this far, we're getting very small pockets where there are actual clouds, and for the rest of the area, there are not clouds. So as you guys can see, there's kind of pockets of atmosphere, and the lower I push this, the thicker those pockets become. So let's say we're going for something kind of like a dust cloud. We're not going to want there to be complete fog, obviously, as you can't see anything. We're going to want something probably around 0.55 right now. Looks pretty good. Let's see, pushing it down just a little bit. We'll go 0.53. I really like the effect this is giving us. As you guys can see, when I look through the fog, we're getting kind of that like Swiss cheese effect where there's like little pockets of nothingness and then fog overall. Now, if you want to render with this, you're completely good to go if you're just rendering a JPEG or a PNG file. But if you want to animate this, so if you're making like a movie or something, obviously fog, unless there are clouds up in the sky, which moves slower, these would be moving probably fast as the wind is sweeping through the scene. So one of the last steps you're going to want to do to create that kind of like atmospheric fog effect is you're going to want to animate this texture. With our noise texture, as you guys can see, it says 3D. We have options to control our scale, our detail, our roughness, and our distortion. Scale is simply the size of the fog. So the higher I crank this, the smaller those particles will be. I like it at about 5. That feels the most realistic. Detail is the amount of, on the fringe edges, let me go back to the preview mode. As you can see on the edges, it's just adding a little bit finer detail. With fog, it's not terribly important just because once you get to those really thin elements, you're not really, like this area right here, you're not super going to see that. So I'm not sure how much computer you're going to save or render time you're going to save, but you can just leave it at something like 0.5. The roughness, again, will just break up that fog a little bit more. But I think default 0.5 is pretty good, and distortion will just give us this like trippy wave effect. So we're going to want to leave those off. So just plain, we have those controls. What we're going to want to do, however, is add another control. And what this control is instead of this texture being, quote, 3D, meaning we have control of those other elements, we're going to want to bump this up to 4D. And what this gives us is an extra dimension. So this extra dimension, you can kind of just think about it as like a time dimension. So with our W value, which will be representative of time right now, at 0, you can see here's what the texture looks like. And then if I go to 1, we get a brand new texture. The magic happens when you fade through them, okay? So what this does is it allows us to have movement within the fog itself. So from 0 to 1, this might be kind of abstract because you're not able to completely tell what is going on. But if we go to, let's say, 0, and we are going to go to our 3D view, or our timeline. So let's go to our timeline. We can just go to our timeline here. You're going to want to click onto the W and then click I on your keyboard at frame 1. And what that does is it creates a keyframe that we'll then use to animate. If you go to the end of the animation, so right now we have a 250 frame animation, you're going to want to just change that number. Let's start with something small like 0.2. And then again, once that number is changed, just click I to save. And now if we scroll through the timeline and you're focusing on this W value, you can see it slowly growing throughout the animation. So what this looks like in practice is, if I go push play, nice, we're getting this kind of like breathing effect, right? Kind of like a Rorschach mask kind of aesthetic, where we're getting this movement in the fog. Without the texture on, it's kind of difficult to see, even with my graphics card, like kind of what that's exactly doing. But when you render it out, you'll kind of see that breathing and movement. Obviously, in the viewport, this doesn't make a ton of sense because unless you're going for something as like abstract within sci-fi where like fog or it's like a live thing and the fog is like morphing into an alien or something, fog wouldn't just be moving in one spot, right? It'd be moving through a scene. Again, we still want that evolution, but we want it to also be moving sideways. There's a couple ways you can do this. The first and easiest way is you can simply move the entire fog through the scene. However, a lot of times you're going to have very specific pockets where you want something and you don't necessarily want to move the entire thing through your scene. However, this is kind of the end effect. If you look at Suzanne and you look at the smoke going across the scene, we're kind of getting that like Wild West vibe where the dust is kind of settling and, you know, like a big explosion just happened or something. So let's go back to our default. How can we do this with the things we have? As I said before, now we had a time dimension, so that gives us some movement, but we want one more control, right? We want the ability to move the texture while keeping the mesh in the same spot. Because once again, what we're looking at the end of the day is just a cube. We are going to use Node Wrangler, which is the thing I had you guys install first. Node Wrangler is a really great plugin that I use all the time. I have to select my noise texture. I click Control and T, and this adds a mapping and a coordinate texture node. Both of these nodes you can add normally, but this just speeds up your workflow a lot, and Node Wrangler gives you a bunch of other benefits that I can go into for later videos. Let's now see what we can do with this mapping node. So as you can see, there are 3 types of controls we have for the mapping node: location, rotation, and scale. Scale is simply just what it means, right? It's the scale of the thing. So this is simply just moving the value of only the X, and then you can move the value of the Y, and then the Z. So the Z up and down, X, and the Y. So what we're going to want to do is we know that the scale is not what we want, right? We don't want the fog squishing. We know we don't want the fog rotating because it's not like the middle of a vortex or anything like that. We don't want it just spinning around on an axis. We want it physically moving. So we're going to pick our axis. It looks like X is with the Suzanne going this way. We're going to have it go this way. So if we change this X value, as you can see, we're infinitely now able to move this fog through the scene, which is super cool. There are some instances where you want them to move in unison, but for this, we can simply just start off with an X value move. So what we're gonna do, once again, let's go back to our timeline. We're gonna go to frame 1. So just go up here, click frame 1, and we're gonna put an I for the keyframe for our location. Go to the end of your animation, and we're gonna do something like 0.2. And then click I one more time. So now as we scroll through our animation, just like the W value, we can now see the X value is also moving. Let's go to the color ramp, as that's the last node. And if we do Control, Shift, and color ramp, we're now able to see what the color ramp is seeing. So let's play this. Okay, so we're getting that movement, which we like, the billowing kind of nature of the fog. But I think it's slightly too slow. So what we're going to do instead is go back to our timeline and go to timeline. We're going to go to 250, and rather than 0.2, let's do something like 0.7, and then we're going to click I, and if we go back to our viewport, if we play the animation back, there we go. Now we're getting that good movement of fog across the scene. And again, like everything else, that looks so ominous. Okay, so take off the surface thing. Like everything else, now, again, it's kind of hard to see, but we're getting fog movement across the scene. So there will be times where there'll be more smoke, and there's going to be times that there's less smoke, like this frame right here. So we're getting a lot of good movement throughout the scene, and this is a great example of how you can make cinematic lighting pretty simply, but also just add a lot to the scene. So if we go to rendered mode, we're just going to render this out in 1920 by 1080, and we'll just do something like 1,000 samples just for the picture. We'll pick a frame at random. This frame right here looks pretty interesting, and then we'll do F12 to render, And nice. As you can see, we're already getting those nice pockets where like in here, there's not as much. Up here, there's more. And it just gives you a lot of that textured feel, as well as the HDRI making everything look a little bit more realistic. The last thing that you can do too, that does help push lighting a little bit more, is go down to your depth of field settings, select your object, and then do something like a f-stop of, let's say, 0.5, and that'll give us a little bit of that depth of field, which looks really nice. I like to select something realistic for my blades in case you end up doing like lens flares. So you can do something like 9 blades, and then to get that really nice effect, you can also do aspect ratio of 3, which gives you that anamorphic look. So if we look at our lighting here, and then we render it out one more time, boom. So as you can see, just by throwing out the background a little bit, we're getting a little bit more realistic effect, as well as getting some really nice fog. So this is an effect I use all the time in my renders, and I'm definitely going to use it in all of my projects because it just adds a lot of texture. Obviously, you don't necessarily need this much fog at any given time, but just adding those details of having movement in the scene once fully rendered will make it feel a lot nicer. I'd like to give a quick shout out to all the Patreon supporters. If you want to continue seeing more educational content or help support the show, it really means a lot. And thank you guys for staying to the end of the video. Have fun!